If you're driving down Route 5 on your way to the great city of Buffalo, odds are you are wondering what that massive factory you just passed once was. That would be the Bethlehem Steel Plant. Previously named Lackawanna Steel, it was the second largest steel plant in the world at the time it was constructed in 1902. Employing over 20,000 Buffalonians, the Lackawanna Steel Company was critical to the city's success. In 1922, Lackawanna Steel was bought out by Bethlehem Steel for $60 million. By World War II, the plant was the largest steel-making operation in the world, from producing the steel for ships, tanks, guns, and other military needs. Unfortunately, the demand for steel greatly reduced by the 1970s. With new foreign competition, Bethlehem Steel Company could no longer financially support the Lackawanna plant. The closing of the plant was announced in 1982. Families and lives were born in Buffalo because of the opportunity given to them by the company. It is gone, but certainly not forgotten. In 1984, a steel plant museum was established in order to preserve the memories of the steel industry of Western New York.
When they say that Buffalo was built on the backs of Irishmen, they're not joking. Thanks to the Erie Canal, Buffalo became a major port connecting the East Coast to the Midwest. The Irish would slave hours a day doing extreme amounts of labor to unload the grain from the ships to the silos and back. It wasn't until Joseph Dart came along in 1842 and developed an elevator from the design of Oliver Evans that this changed. Because the early elevators were made from wood, however, and the grain dust was explosive, many fires occurred, making it a need for a new material to be used. Thanks to the new material and the fact that grain workers were so careful, fires were prevented and the grain industry brought great wealth to this area. But because of the wealth, there were people who sought to exploit the wealth. Saloon bosses would take control of nearly every aspect of the workers' life. They would give the workers housing and allowed them to drink for free during the week, but it would build up a tab. When payday came, the saloon bosses would take money for the drinks and other expenses out of the check without allowing the workers to see what they were really earning. This made it so that the workers stayed very poor while the saloon bosses made a lot of money. When finally unions were formed, grain workers were able to make sufficient wages and the First World was able to prosper. This, however, did not last long because the decline of the grain industry began during the 1920s. There were three main reasons for the decline of the grain industry. The first was the opening of the Welland Canal. The Welland Canal was a much larger canal than the Erie Canal, which allowed for much larger ships to pass through it. It was also closer to the Great Lakes and to the west than Buffalo was, so ships could completely bypass Buffalo. This was further reinforced with the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway. The St. Lawrence Seaway connected the Niagara River directly to the ocean. This meant that ships could go from the Great Lakes to the Welland Canal, bypassing Buffalo, straight to the St. Lawrence Seaway and out to the ocean. This third reason was the opening of the newly and more connected railroad system. The railroad was a faster way of traveling than ships, which meant that they could haul grain farther than ships could, and faster than ships could.
Trains began to be used much more in the early 1900s because they were much faster and more efficient than boats. In the 1920s, Buffalo became the second largest railroad hub in the USA, and on June 22, 1929, Buffalo Central Terminal was opened. Empire State Express was the first train to leave the terminal at 2:10 p.m. heading eastbound. However, only a few months later, the stock market crashed, causing the Great Depression. This severely hurt the Central Terminal and Buffalo as a whole. Over $130 million was made in revenue in 1929 from the Central Terminal, but only $53 million was made in revenue in 1933. That's a 60% drop in just 4 years. The Central Terminal consistently declined for the next few decades due to the Great Depression, use of cars and airplanes. It was officially closed in 1979. The terminal is vacant now, and it was bought by the Central Terminal Restoration Corporation for $1 and hopes to restore it so it can be used in the future. Cars were also a big part of Buffalo's history. In 1901, George N. Pierce created the first one-cylinder automobile, which was displayed at the Pan Am Expo. George N. Pierce first started selling bicycles, ice boxes, and bird cages, and he eventually formed the Pierce Arrow Company in 1901. A lot of Pierce Arrow cars were used in the military in World War I and were even driven by presidents such as William Taft and Franklin Roosevelt. The cars were really for the wealthy, and you could tell if it was a Pierce Arrow by the helmeted archer hood ornament on the front of the car, as well as the headlights coming out of the fenders. However, Pierce Arrow was sold to Studebaker in 1928 because it could not keep up with the mass production of Ford and GM, and later went bankrupt in 1938.
Here in Buffalo, we pride ourselves on a multitude of things. One such thing is the beautiful architecture of our city. Whether it be our park system designed by Frederick Law Olmsted or the Darwin Martin House, a house many believe to be the crowning achievement of the great American architect Frank Lloyd Wright, there is no shortage of beautiful architecture throughout our whole city. The Buffalo City Hall is the second largest city hall in all of America, and one that is just astonishing in its detail. There are also two buildings that were created in the very early 1900s for the Pan American Exposition. The Buffalo History Museum and the Albury Knox are both still standing today right across the river from each other, and they are just gorgeous buildings. On top of the gorgeous architecture of our city, we have a gorgeous naturally made landmark just to the north of our city. The old post office was also built in the early 1900s. It's built in a Gothic style, and the first letter ever to be sent out of the office was sent by the Postmaster General to President William McKinley, inviting him to come to the Pan American Exposition. Buffalo is also home to the Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural National Historical Site. This is the site in which Theodore Roosevelt was inaugurated shortly following the death of William McKinley. During the Pan American Exposition, there was a tower created called the Electric Tower that was used in order to show off the electricity that was going around the city. The tower was only made temporarily, but it was such a hit that it was rebuilt and now stands tall today. One building significant to Buffalo's history is the Buffalo Central Terminal. The Buffalo Central Terminal was built in 1929 in an Art Deco style and enjoyed much success in the first couple months of its opening before the stock market crashed later that year. The Central Terminal never quite recovered from the stock market crash and closed its doors shortly thereafter. In 1984, however, the building was placed on the public registry for historic landmarks, showing how influential it was to the city.
In the year of 1678, a Roman Catholic missionary named Father Louis Hennepin and a French explorer named Robert de La Salle came to Niagara. Not long afterwards, a fort was built by the French along the Niagara River in order to monopolize on profitable fur trading operations. Now, around 300 years later, Fort Niagara is a popular tourist attraction and one of the oldest buildings in the Northeast. In general, the Niagara Falls are viewed with a multitude of different viewpoints that are completely dependent upon time. Before Hennepin and La Salle ever set foot on American soil, early Native Americans had already built a portage trail or a canoe trail to go around the falls. Goat Island was even used as a home for a wandering hermit and a background for Sand Patch, otherwise known as the Jersey Jumper, to plummet 85 feet into the freezing Niagara water. Following Sand Patch, during the 1860s, Charles Blondin, Iphigenia the Great, did incredible tightrope stunts across the Niagara Falls. Soon, the Niagara Falls were no longer regarded as a singular show, but as a backdrop. From 1847 to 1877, the Niagara Falls underwent the Hydraulic Canal Project. Then, in the early 1900s, electricity was finally transported to Buffalo. Due to an abundance of electricity, many chemical companies flocked to the Niagara region. In the 1950s, a man by the name of Robert Moses oversaw the creation of the Robert Moses Niagara Hydraulics Power Station in Lewiston. However, there has been an incredible amount of damage done to the Niagara region. Some areas, such as the Love Canal, are heavily polluted and extremely dangerous. Despite these setbacks, the Niagara region is being heavily invested in by a project called the Buffalo Billion. The Buffalo Manufacturing Works, the Buffalo Medical Innovation and Commercialization Hub at Buffalo Niagara Campus, and the Downtown Niagara Falls redevelopment program, which is focusing on redeveloping the Rainbow Mall, are all going to be integrated into this Buffalo Billion project. When Father Louis Hennepin first saw the Niagara Falls in 1678, he was overwhelmed by its power and beauty. Today, the Niagara region, along with the Niagara Falls, are being transformed into areas of industrial and scientific power, as well as areas of increasing innovation and opportunity. Aspects that are transforming Western New York into a more beautiful place to live.